I've been networking my entire life, and so have you.
I'm Sam G, an architect who has rebuilt my career 3 times across South Africa, Australia, and now Texas, USA. Along the way, I've learned architecture isn't just code and concrete, it's culture, climate, community, and the courage to begin again. Your Design Passport brings you conversations on licensure, global practice, sustainability, lifestyle transitions, and the personal skills that actually help you thrive abroad. If you're dreaming about a global design life, grab your passport. We leave now.
Welcome back to Your Design Passport, the podcast where we explore architecture and design, career journeys, and the ideas shaping our profession. I'm your host, Sam G. Last episode, I sat down with Cassidy Jones, and we spoke all about networking, leadership, and career growth. It was a fantastic conversation, and if you haven't listened to episode 15, I definitely recommend going back and giving it a listen first. But after we finished recording, I kept thinking about networking, and honestly, I got a little stuck. I thought, what on earth do I have to add to this conversation? So I did what every architect does. I overthought it. Then I did what every architect who's overthinking something does. I looked up the definition. According to Merriam-Webster, networking is the exchange of information or services among individuals, specifically the cultivation of productive relationships for employment or business. Oxford says it's the action or process of interacting with others to exchange information and develop professional or social contacts. And Britannica talks about developing and maintaining social and professional contacts to exchange information, resources, or services. And after reading all 3 definitions, I realized something. I've been networking my entire life. And so have you. Think about it. Have you ever been in a classroom? Congratulations, you've been networking. Played on a sports team? Networking. Joined a club? Networking. Worked your very first job waiting tables, serving coffee, or working retail? Networking. Studied architecture at university? Definitely networking. When I really started thinking about it, I realized that networking isn't something that suddenly starts when you graduate. It's something we've been doing naturally our entire lives. In fact, when I really started thinking about it, I realized my very first architecture job came through networking too. At the time, I didn't think of it that way. I just thought I got lucky. Between finishing my honors degree and starting my master's, I was looking for my first proper big girl architecture job, or as we'd have called it back then, a student of architecture position. Now, depending on where you are in the world, that title has changed a few times. Here in the US, you'd probably hear something like technical staff, but back then, student of architecture was the title. My dad happened to mention to the air conditioning contractor at his work, Chris, that I was looking for a job. Chris knew someone at an architectural firm. As it turned out, not just someone, one of the partners. I can only imagine the conversations that happened behind the scenes. Hey, I've got a friend's daughter who's studying architecture and looking for her first opportunity. That's probably all it took. The firm happened to be looking for someone. I went for the interview, and I got the job. At the time, I thought that was just luck. Looking back now, it was networking. Not mine, my dad's, Chris's. Someone being kind enough to make an introduction. Without that connection, finding my very first architecture job would have been a whole lot harder. Especially because, as Carl and I spoke about back in episode 5, the industry was going through a recession at the time. Jobs weren't exactly plentiful. One conversation, one introduction, one opportunity. Looking back now, it's funny how many moments in my career started exactly like that. I've reached out to old classmates years after university. I've stayed friends with people from every architectural firm I've ever worked at. I've kept in touch with consultants, contractors, clients, sales reps. Some have become great professional contacts. Many have become genuine friends. Actually, this podcast is a perfect example. Carl, past classmate. Emily and Cassidy, former colleagues. Samantha Flores, a referral. Neil Pan, That was good old-fashioned cold outreach. Every guest has come from a connection somewhere, some close, some completely unexpected. And that's when it hit me. Looking back, almost every major decision I've made started with a conversation. And I don't think that's a coincidence. It isn't collecting business cards. It isn't awkward small talk while balancing a canapé and napkin in one hand and a beverage in the other, trying not to spill on yourself. Networking is the subtle connections you've been making every single day, often without even realizing it, until one day an opportunity appears, which brings me to one of my favorite stories. Because this is exactly how I landed my first job in Australia. Before moving overseas, I was working on one of my favorite high-end residential projects back in South Africa. Amazing project, amazing family. One of the projects you never forget. When I told everyone I was moving to Australia, the quantity surveyor Sean on the project said, "You should get in touch with my friend Jim. He's in Brisbane." Simple as that. Introductions were made, pleasantries were exchanged via email. Jim kindly offered to send my CV and portfolio to a few firms before I even arrived. He also recommended a couple recruiters. Fantastic, I thought. This is going to be easy. It wasn't. Finding a job became my full-time job. Every Monday, I'd research architecture firms. I had a spreadsheet. Of course I had a spreadsheet. Actually, it was color-coded. Every firm, office location, project types, phone numbers, email addresses, website, and let me tell you, there was some very creative interpretation of email addresses happening. The next day, I sent out my CV and portfolio. The day after that, follow-up emails, phone calls. Then I'd repeat the process over and over and over again. The hardest part wasn't even the work. It was the silence. No response, or another polite rejection. Another Dear John email. Another recruiter saying, "I'm so sorry, but we really need someone with local experience." Then came my favorite response. "We can't help you until you find your first job. Then we can help you find your next one." Sorry? What? If I can find my first job, I can probably find my second one. The problem is I need someone to give me the first job. After 3 weeks of this, I was exhausted. The spreadsheet was filling up. My confidence was not. And I realized I needed to do something different. So I reached back out to Jim. We met for lunch at Grilled in Brisbane City. We chatted about our journeys, South Africa, Australia, architecture, life. Then I asked him, "Are there any firms you'd recommend I apply to?" He gave me 3 or 4 names. I applied, just like I'd done hundreds of times already. Then I asked him one more favor. I said, "Would you mind checking in on my application and maybe putting in a good word for me?" He agreed. I have absolutely no idea what Jim said, but whatever it was, it must have been incredible. Because at the end of my interview, the director looked at me and said, "The recommendation we received from Jim was glowing. I just had to meet you." Cringe. The pressure was on, but I got the job. It was the only positive response I'd received during that entire search. And that one relationship changed everything. Looking back now, Jim didn't get me the job. I still had to interview. I still had to prove myself. But he opened a door that I couldn't open alone. And I'll always be grateful for that act of kindness.
Quick pause here. If you're enjoying this episode, don't forget to subscribe to Your Design Passport. It helps more globally minded architects find this show. And if you're considering working internationally and don't want to feel like you're starting over, I've created a free guide called the International Architect Starter Map. It walks you through the exact strategic questions you should answer before touching a single application form. You can download that in the show notes.
One thing Cassidy said during our conversation was to put yourself out there. Say the thing. Sometimes, anything. And that's exactly what networking has looked like throughout my life. Not perfectly, not confidently, just consistently. Networking has also looked different in every country I've lived in. In South Africa, it was school, university, work, and lifelong friends. In Australia, it expanded. Working in business development taught me something I never expected. I realized I was literally being paid to make friends. And I loved it. It never felt sleazy. It never felt salesy. It was simply about getting to know people, learning about their businesses, finding common ground, building relationships. One of my favorite examples happened completely by accident. I attended one of the mandatory CPDs at the first architecture firm I worked for in Australia. The presenter was Andy from Big Ass Fans. At the end of her presentation, she casually mentioned that she'd recently moved from the United States and didn't really know anyone. She jokingly said if anyone wanted to grab a coffee or hang out sometime, she'd love that. I remember sitting there thinking, I know exactly how that feels. I'd been there. So after finding what I thought was the perfect event, the annual Eaton's Hill Beer Festival, I reached out. Thankfully, it was a success. We all got along brilliantly. My husband and her partner became friends. We became close friends. Fast forward to today, we're now living in the same country and same state again. We're godparents to their gorgeous little girl, and despite not seeing each other nearly as often as we'd like, at least it's no longer a 15-hour flight. So I'll take that as a win. I've started joking that I'm collecting architectural licenses and best friends on every continent. And honestly, maybe I am. One quote I came across in a daily newsletter while preparing this episode, and I think it perfectly sums up how I try to approach networking. Princess Diana once said, "Carry out a random act of kindness with no expectation of reward, safe in the knowledge that one day someone might do the same." I love that quote because I think that's exactly what good networking looks like. It's not about keeping score. It's not about asking yourself, what can this person do for me? It's simply about helping people because you can, and trusting that somewhere, sometime, someone else will do the same for you. I remember when I was thinking about leaving architecture to become a product representative. At the time, it felt like a huge decision. Architecture was all I'd ever known. It felt like quitting, and I wasn't sure if stepping into sales was the right move. So I reached out to our Dulux paint representative at the time, Alison. She was wonderful. She became such a great sounding board. I asked her about her role, how she'd built her career, what life was really like on the supplier side of the industry, and whether she thought it would be a good fit for me. She also introduced me to another product representative who had previously been an architect, someone who had already made the leap to what architects jokingly call the dark side. The funny thing was, she absolutely loved it. She'd been in the role for years and had no intentions of ever going back. That conversation gave me the confidence that maybe this wasn't such a crazy career move after all. But Alison didn't stop there. She also encouraged me to visit the Build and Design Centre in Brisbane. If you've never been there, it's essentially a hub where manufacturers and suppliers showcase their products to architects, designers, and the public. Companies like Polytech, James Hardie, and many others have permanent displays there. When I called into the centre, the phone operator, who just so happened to be South African, mentioned that 2 companies were actively looking for people. I reached out to both. One of those companies was Ostaran Surfaces, and that's where the next chapter begins. Looking back now, leaving architecture at the time felt like a huge risk, but Ostaran turned out to be one of the most enjoyable jobs I've ever had. It is a family-owned business that punches well above its weight. Great people, amazing products, a genuinely supportive culture. And it taught me lessons that I still use today. The other thing I realized was I hadn't actually left the architectural industry at all. I was still working with architects every single day. I was still visiting practices, still meeting designers, still learning, still building relationships. I'd simply changed seats around the same table. And if I ever wanted to move back into architecture in Australia, I already had genuine relationships with people across the industry. Talk about an inside track. Looking back now, that's another example of networking quietly working in the background. One conversation with Alison led to another conversation that led to another introduction, which led to another opportunity, none of which was planned. None of it was transactional. It was simply people helping people. Now let's talk business cards. Because I have a confession. I don't think collecting business cards is networking. I think it's collecting little pieces of cardboard. Some are really beautifully designed. Some are fancy. Most are pretty boring. and they usually end up sitting in a drawer somewhere. Instead, save their details in your phone. Make a few notes. Where did you meet them? What project were you talking about? Who introduced you? What did you have in common? Then, reach out. Because relationships aren't built when you exchange business cards. They're built afterwards. As I reflect on the last 15 years, which is honestly a slightly terrifying sentence to say out loud, I realize something. Almost every meaningful opportunity in my career has come through a relationship. Not because someone handed me a job, but because someone remembered me, someone trusted me, someone introduced me to someone else, someone opened a door. And that's exactly what's happening with this podcast. Most of my guests so far have come through my existing network. Friends introducing friends, former colleagues introducing new people, guests recommending future guests. It's still early days, but I'm already meeting people I probably never would have crossed paths with otherwise. And I genuinely can't wait to see where this journey leads. So, what's my definition of networking? Networking isn't about collecting business cards. It isn't about attending events. And it certainly isn't about seeing what you can get from someone. It's about showing up with generosity, curiosity, and kindness. It's about meeting people, finding common ground, building genuine relationships, helping people where you can, and carrying out those random acts of kindness with no expectation of reward. Because one day, you might be the Jim in someone else's story, or the Allison, or the Chris, or simply the person who opens a door for someone else. And if you're lucky, you'll collect far more than contacts. You'll collect stories, opportunities, mentors, friends, maybe even a few architectural licenses, and best friends on different continents. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, I'd love it if you could share with someone who's starting their career, changing careers, or maybe feeling a little intimidated by the idea of networking. If you enjoyed today's episode, I'd love it if you could share it with someone who's starting their career, changing careers, or maybe feeling a little intimidated by the idea of networking. And if you haven't already, go back and listen to my conversation with Cassidy Jones. It was the perfect inspiration for today's episode. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, keep showing up, and keep collecting your own passport stamps.
You've been listening to Your Design Passport. If you're ready to build a design career and a life that travels with you, hit follow and join me every other week for more global stories, strategies, and inspiration. Until then, keep dreaming, keep designing, and keep collecting those passport stamps.